Hello and welcome to the Action Network podcast, UFC betting preview. I'm Sean Zerillo, joined today by Billy Ward to help you break down a 13-fight card for UFC Mexico City. Today's episode, we'll be looking at this week's UFC card, giving you our best bets, favorite underdogs, top props, and more. And if you'd like to tail some of the bets that we discuss on today's show, make sure to find the quick slip links in both the podcast and the video descriptions for today's episode, or go to actionnetwork.com/betnow. 13-fight card at elevation in Mexico City. Cardio, stamina can be a little bit extra important in these fights. Prelims at 4 p.m., 6-fight main card at 7 p.m. Eastern. The main event, Brandon Moreno, minus 250 against Steve Astroboy Erceg at plus 210. This fight is minus 215 to go to decision, plus 160 to end inside the distance. Billy, you give out Brandon Moreno earlier in the week in your luck ratings. Got him about minus 195. Market movement has been one direction on the Moreno side since open. He opened around minus 190. As I said, currently around minus 250. I lean this fight to go over or to go to a decision. You'll find my full preview up on actionnetwork.com. I made this fight about 70% to go to a decision, minus 235 implied. I like Moreno to win that decision and plus 115. However, I think he's looked kind of flat in his recent performances. If you're playing a money line side at this point, I actually think it's Erceg or pass. Now, in terms of how it plays out, Moreno's the more durable guy, has more finishing upside. I think he has more dominant decision upside with top time. And Erceg's win condition is very likely a close competitive decision where he edges 3 of the 5 rounds. I don't really see him pulling away at a dramatic clip. That said, Moreno, I think, has looked kind of flat in his recent performances. And on a money line side, I do think it's Erceg or pass at this price point. So, Billy, I want to get your thoughts now that the line is moved, what you would consider doing this with this line, if there's any props you're interested in playing on the fight, and then any live angles you may consider for this 5-round fight at elevation in Mexico City.
Yeah, I think I agree with you if I hadn't already bet on the Moreno side. Not so much in that I would take Erceg's money line, but Moreno by decision makes a lot of sense, or even the 4-5 decision prop, Moreno live, stuff like that. I trust his cardio a little bit more just because we've seen him in so many 5-round fights. Not that Erceg hasn't, but he totally tanked the 5th round against Pantoja in his only 5th round fight to date. And Moreno has pretty much only ever lost split decisions. Not ever, but like in recent memory, it's all been very close decisions against championship level opponents. Erceg looked really, really good against outside of the top 10 flyweights, got a quick title fight. And then when he's fought up to that level, he lost a clear but competitive decision to Pantoja and then got beaten real bad, knocked down twice against Kai Kara-France. So Erceg's kind of an open book on whether he really is even a championship level fighter in the UFC or just had like a beautiful run over a short period and got thrown into a championship fight because there weren't a lot of flyweights that Pantoja hadn't already fought 17 times. So because of that, I don't really trust his money line. I do like the Moreno decision, Moreno late, that kind of thing. But obviously, I really liked Moreno at inside of 2-1 on Monday, and it's just a classic luck ratings pick for me because his last 2 losses were split decisions against pretty much the best guys in the world, one of which, the title fight against Pantoja, I thought could have gone either way. I think it was scored correctly, but I wouldn't have called it a robbery the other direction, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I'm really glad you pointed out the trajectory of Steve Erceg within the flyweight division. Flyweight, a very shallow division, heavyweight as well. So guys tend to get pushed up the rankings a little bit quicker than they should at times. Shamil Gaziev comes to mind with his main event loss. But Erceg never actually beat any of the guys at the top of the division. He was fighting competitive fights with, as you said, guys ranked outside of the top 10, did win those fights, but then he got to the top of the division, lost the competitive decision Pantoja. Again, like hasn't beaten anybody who is ranked, in the range that Moreno is currently ranked. So level for level, it seems like Moreno is in a higher tier, but I do think the trajectory of both fighters, I still think Erceg is ascending. I still think Moreno is kind of on the back end of his career. Not a substantial age difference between these two. So you don't really see it in terms of the age gap, but Moreno has taken a lot more damage in terms of his fights, adding up over time. He is super durable, though. Like one of the most durable fighters in the history of the sport. I really don't give Erceg very much finishing upside at all here. And if he's not going to finish the fight, he needs to edge 3 close rounds in Mexico City against the hometown fighter. Like he's drawing pretty thin on the margins in terms of actually winning this thing. I think Moreno by decision, as you mentioned, Billy, probably the best bet at plus 125. Currently, I make it plus 115. And then I said I make that goes to decision around minus 250. You can lay minus 200, though it is getting closer to minus 215, minus 220 as we're currently chatting. Let's move on to our fight of the night, the co-main event between Manuel El Loco Torres and Drew Dober. Torres even money, Dober minus 120. Fight heavily juiced to end inside the distance at minus 650. It's near 5-1 to reach a decision. The average lightweight fight goes to a decision about 46% of the time, but Manuel Torres has seen 17 of his 18 career fights end inside of round one. So Torres is an absolute shot out of a cannon type fighter, bit of a glass cannon, either hurts you or tends to get hurt in the opening round, and that's where the fight ends. A bit Terrence McKinney-ish, just in terms of the pace, not the style, but the pace of his fights. It's just shot out of a cannon and somebody's going to die, whoever it is. We saw Dober and McKinney go at it. Dober got knocked down early, got back up, ended up putting McKinney away. And, historically, Drew Dober is super durable. We have seen him get cracked more in recent memory, but he is the older guy here, and he's the smaller guy here. Torres is 6.5 years younger. He's 2 inches taller. He has a 3-inch reach advantage, and he also has the early grappling and submission upside. I just don't like his striking defense, and I do like the level of competition Dober has faced throughout his career. I think he's very experienced. He's going to be facing something here that he has seen in the past. So I would actually expect Dober to try to survive that first 5 minutes because he knows he's going to have the cardio advantage down the stretch. He trains at elevation in Colorado, and he's probably the more durable of the two guys. So I'm waiting for a live bet on Dober after round one. Pre-fight, I'm interested in Dober to win in rounds 2 or 3 at about 6-1 and 11-1 respectively. And then I'd lean to the over 1.5. If you're leaning to the Dober side, you're leaning to the over here. Just don't know if it ultimately gets to the over 1.5 at plus 150. I actually think if it gets over 1.5, it's very likely to go to decision. At that point, I would rather have the decision prop than the over 1.5. So it goes to the decision at plus 490. Interests me a little bit more than the over 1.5 at plus 150. Again, lightweight fights go to decision around a 46% clip. You're getting 5-1 here. That's an enormous number. Billy, you bet Torres pre-fight. You're at even money on Torres. Where's your price target up to? And I think you agree with me. Dober live after round one, also good angle, regardless of whether you have a ticket on Torres or not.
Yeah, for real quick, I want to say it was really sharp saying that if we clear 1.5, we're probably going to a decision. Because given the altitude here, I know Dober trains at altitude, whatever. Mexico City is a whole different animal. You've heard fighters talk about air quality impacting their cardio as well as just the altitude. It's more altitude even than Colorado, I believe. Don't know if that's 100% true.
It is true.
But yeah, so it's one of those where if we get through 7 or 8 minutes, we probably have 2 tired fighters, which leads to not a finish. But yeah, I'm on the Torres side. I think probably down to minus 110 or so. I got it at plus 102 a little bit earlier in the week and logged that in the app. Plus 100, the best you can get now. A couple things stood out for me on tape. The only time he really took a lot of damage in the UFC was against Nacho Bahamondes. He got dropped with the exact same sequence twice, where Torres lunged in with the big left hand and Bahamondes hit the perfect right hand pull counter where you step back, long straight hand. That's going to be a lot easier for a fighter like Nacho, who's way taller than everybody else in the division. Not as much of an option for Dober. If he pulls out of Torres' range, Torres has 3 inches in reach. Dober's not going to be there to hit him back. So I'm not as worried about that. Then the other thing that stands out is he submitted Chris Duncan and just ragdolled him on the ground. And that win has aged pretty well for Torres because Duncan then picked up 2 straight submissions and Torres submitted him. So I do think he has the grappling upside at least early, maybe if not in its entirety. You could certainly take, Torres in the first 2 rounds, and that would make a ton of sense. What I'm trying to do is come in with the Torres ticket around plus money, and then hopefully after round 1, Drew Dober is plus 200, maybe even better. Just kind of build that live betting portfolio where we make money with either guy winning and don't need Torres to get the finish for that win. And as you pointed out with the main event, if we do go to a decision and, first round Torres, second round kind of close, you would imagine in Mexico City that's probably going to lean Torres' way more often than not. So that's what's keeping me from the finish or early prop stuff. But ideally, we get into this third round or some point in this fight where we're making money either way.
Let's move to the next fight on the card as we move to our favorite underdog section. You're taking a stab at Kelvin Gastelum at plus 250 against Joe Pyfer. I'll have more on this fight in my best bet section, but go ahead and give me your thoughts on Gastelum and Pyfer. And I'd imagine Gastelum live after round one, also a potential ad spot for you too.
Yeah, I believe you said Moreno earlier was one of the most durable fighters in UFC history. Kelvin Gastelum, much more durable than that, has taken some of the biggest shots from some of the toughest strikers in the world and made it all the way to the final bell. Dropped 4 times by Izzy, made it all the way through, made that a competitive fight. I believe has never been knocked out in his career.
Never KO'd, yeah.
And he's taking on Joe Pyfer, who allegedly had the hardest punch in the UFC Performance Institute or whatever, but there was some debate about that. And it's kind of a one-note big power guy. Pyfer can grapple a little bit. I think Gastelum's wrestling is considerably better. So if Gastelum manages to not get knocked out here, he's got better output. As a middleweight, he's got better cardio, and he's just the more technical fighter all around. At plus 250 on the money line, I think that's a pretty strong combination. I know you're going to give out a bet that kind of aligns with that view of things. And also, Gastelum will be the more popular fighter. We think close decisions probably go his way. All of that at plus 250, I'm really excited about.
Yeah, and live after round one, I think, may get the best price too. Pyfer is very physical. He's much bigger than Gastelum. I think he's likelier to win round one than he is to win the other 2 rounds in this fight. So likely get Gastelum maybe 4-1, 5-1 after round one. But there's a chance, Mexico City elevation, maybe Pyfer comes out a little bit more conservative, trying to conserve that gas tank, right? We see guys freak out and change their strategy sometimes at elevation too, because they don't want to gas out. Yeah. So definitely consider that as well. Maybe Pyfer starts a little bit, more conservative, and Gastelum is able to kick his legs a little bit, slow him down, and that changes the dynamic of the fight. I'm going to give out one underdog here, Julia Pilastri at plus 225 against Lupi Godinez. She's also plus 300 to win by decision, and that is most of the basis for the fight. Minus 600 to go to a decision, taking the underdog here in a fight that is expected to be close and competitive and go all 15 minutes. And Pilastri is the more aggressive of the two. Lupi gets caught staring at her opponent sometimes, being unsure whether she should strike or grapple when she has the grappling advantage. She's not always reliable to pursue the path of least resistance against her opponents. And then when her fights hit the ground, she tends to prioritize submission over position. She's somebody who needs like 8 or 9 takedowns across a fight to get substantial control time, because she's constantly letting her opponents up because she's trying to progress to positions that she probably shouldn't, or trying to attack things that she's not in the correct position to actually attack. So I do think Lupi, her control could be a little bit lacking at times. Her tendency or her proactiveness in terms of wanting to grapple can certainly be lacking at times. And if she's not going to grapple here against Pilastri, Pilastri is just going to be the more aggressive fighter coming forward. And we'll see whether Godinez can counter her effectively across 15 minutes and steal a striking decision. But Pilastri, the reach advantage, she's 5 years younger. We've seen her get stuck on her back. If she's made any improvement to her defensive grappling, I think she's going to look like value here at north of 2-1. Pilastri 225, and then by decision at plus 300. Billy, any thoughts on that fight? And then you've got a couple other underdogs you want to give out. Go ahead with those.
Yeah, not a ton from a betting standpoint. Lupi is a tremendous DFS play for the exact reason you described, because she could get 8 or 9 takedowns and those score really well. And it's just the perfect setup for that. Like you laid it out perfectly. She didn't get a lot of takedowns in her recent fights, but she's fought 3 straight submission specialists. And now she's going back to someone who she should be able to control on the ground. As you said, will probably go for a bad armbar or something, fall off, and have to get another takedown multiple times in each round, which we just love for DFS. So kind of rooting for your bet, but really just need her to get 8 or 9 takedowns and win. The other underdog I really like here is Jose Funky Cold Medina. Not his actual nickname, 100%. Should be his nickname. This reminds me so much of the Carlos Vera upset we got a few weeks ago, where it's a guy who's a little bit more skilled, way worse athlete, taking on a debuting fighter who's a bit of a brawler with all the physical and strength advantages in Atiba Gauthier. We haven't seen it from Medina in the Contender Series or the UFC, but he's actually primarily a grappler. He's competed in pro submission grappling. When I broke him down for the Contender Series, a lot of grappling on the regional series. Gauthier on the Contender Series in the first round got taken down and controlled for 4 minutes. Then he got a second round knockout. So there's an issue, with if this fight extends. I got Medina at plus 400 earlier in the week. Plus 340 is still fine. I'm not saying he's going to win. He has a very clear path to, if he can follow that plan, he should win. Also, never been knocked out, seems pretty durable. So I like that. I'm going to talk about him in the props. Sean, you just looked something up. You look excited about it. Let's share with the class.
Well, you got Funky Cold Medina, but then you also could have Atiba, somebody that I used to know, Gautier. So we've got two potentially elite nicknames. If the UFC wants to go with either of those, happy to offer them up for free, Bruce Buffer. Take them away.
One-hit wonder nicknames, no less.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. You've got one other underdog you're considering giving out, maybe Austin Hubbard in the first fight of the night?
Yeah, it's honestly kind of the same logic as Medina. Gautier just at a way worse price, where Hubbard definitely at an athletic disadvantage, but tough, durable, should be able to grapple better than Markel Medeiros. I'm not even 100% sure that I'm playing that, so follow me in the app. If we were getting Medina-esque prices, I'd be all over that. I think he's like plus 140, plus 150, somewhere in there. It's close, maybe even a live bet, but similar logic, just not as great of a price.
Did you mention Medina live as well? Was that an angle you mentioned?
Possibly. I have a couple other long shot props on him that we'll touch on in a second. So, but yeah, if he can get a take, I'm struggling with Medina live because if he can't get a takedown early, he's probably not going to get a takedown later on, even if he survives the round, unless Gautier totally tires out. If he does get the takedown earlier, we're getting a worse price. So it's a pretty narrow needle to thread on a Medina live bet. It could be there. It might, but like, it's hard to see exactly how that scenario plays out that I would want it.
March is the best month of the year, not just for sports, but also for getting the best deal on Action Pro. Right now, you can get Action Pro for just over $5 a month for the entire year. And since it's March, that means the NCAA tournament is in full swing. With an Action Pro account, you'll get Sean Kerner's bracket simulations, Nick Gibbons player props, Stuckey's picks up 30 minutes before they go out to everybody else, and more. Plus, since this entire year of Action Pro, you'll be covered for UFC, Major League Baseball, next college football, and NFL seasons too. Just go to actionnetwork.com/March to get on board. Let's move on to our top props. I've got a number of props I'm considering giving out. This is not a good card, in my opinion, for betting money lines. I think there's a lot of favorites that are appropriately priced. I gave out the one underdog I'm interested in. That might be the only money line I bet on the card. And even that, not a force play, but like it's borderline for me in terms of betting Pilastri. But there are a number of ghost the decision props I like on this card. There's a few ends inside the distance props I like on this card. But before we get there, Billy, since we were already talking about Jose Funky Cold Medina, let's stick with the two props you like for his fight. More plus money on Medina. Go ahead.
Yeah, Medina to get a takedown on DraftKings was plus 225, at least as of last night. Check it. Those move all over the place like crazy. I would play that anything north of like plus 150. It correlates very well with how he has a shot at winning. And then Medina by submission, 19-1. Not saying it's going to happen, but if Medina wins, I was surprised to see submission as his least likely win condition in the market. You could make a case it should be his most likely win condition, maybe behind decision, but like they should be fairly close. So yeah, those two on Funky Cold Medina, we're going to speak that one into existence. And I'm structuring it so if he gets a takedown, even if he loses the fight overall, I come out slightly ahead. Play with that, risk exposure being what it is. Find how you want to play that. Obviously, not too big on submission at 19-1. That's like 0.1 unit for me.
So I've got four fights I want to talk about from a prop perspective. Billy, I want to get your thoughts on these as well, just so I'm not talking for 10 minutes consecutively. So if you don't have any thoughts on the fight after I throw it to you, just tell me pass and I'll move on to the next one. If you do have any thoughts, please go ahead and give them out. The first being David Martinez against Simon Oliveira. Martinez really impressed me on Contender Series, Billy. I'm not sure what your thoughts were on him. Both he and his sister, I believe, earned contracts on the same night off a Contender Series. And Oliveira has a big reach advantage here, Simon Oliveira, but Martinez has the big cardio and durability edge. And I think he takes over this fight in the second and third rounds. I think he wins the fight from open, but I think he really takes over in rounds 2 and rounds 3 after kicking Oliveira's legs a bunch and slowing him down. Once he slows him down, I think he starts putting the punching combinations together and eventually finishing him. Expecting more of an attritional finish here, though, at elevation. Martinez inside the distance, plus 130 I like. I made that minus money, but I also like him to win in round 2 at plus 650 or round 3 at 9-1. Billy, what were your thoughts on David Martinez generally as a prospect? And do you have any thoughts on this fight from a betting perspective?
Yeah, I wasn't like super high on him. He wasn't one of my favorites coming off the season, but definitely solid. Definitely a guy who can stick around. Got on the same season as his sister, but they fought on different nights. So it was not
Okay.
the exact same event, which would have been absolutely nuts had they done it that way. Like, imagine the pressure on both of them. But yeah, I think I agree with you. The one thing that gives me a little bit of pause, and you covered it with saying attritional finish, is Martinez more of like a Taekwondo kind of point fighter s style, but does
Mhm.
mix in those leg kicks well. If this weren't at elevation, I would probably be all over Martinez decision.
Mhm.
I get your logic. I'm not betting either side of it. I do think he can wear him down. It's just a matter of whether he wears him down enough with the time we have to get that finish.
Yeah, definitely prefer the like I said, the plus 650 and plus 900 as opposed to the plus 130 inside the distance. I don't really think he wins in round one
Yeah.
at a consistent clip. I think he builds to a finish here, especially at elevation. Ronaldo Lazy Boy Rodriguez against Kevin Borges. I made this fight about minus 167 to go to a decision. I like the fight GTD at minus 142. And I also like Lazy Boy by decision at plus 230. He's very bad striking defense, but he's incredibly durable. And he's also like tenacious. He's not a great wrestler. He's just very tenacious in terms of proactively grappling. Kind of like a poor man's Anthony Hernandez, a little bit, in terms of the overall skill set. You see that a little bit, Billy, maybe?
Yeah,
Uh,
I get where you're going with it.
yeah, just like it's I think fighters like this are difficult to handicap because when you watch tape, you're like, oh my God, this guy just eats punches. Like, what is he even good at? But when you're fighting against them, you're like, this guy needs to like fuck off. Like, just get away from me. Because especially at Mexico City in elevation, Rodriguez is gonna potentially maul Borges, like just in terms of not going away. Like body on body, forcing it to be close, grappling exchanges nonstop. Borges is powerful. He won a round against Josh Van. He hurt him early, ended up fading down the stretch of that fight. Not sure if that was on short notice or not. He does have decent cardio, in general. I don't think he's a guy who's going to get finished in the second or third round, but I do think his effectiveness, the power, the output is all going to wane in the second or third rounds, especially as Rodriguez starts sticking to him, grappling a little bit more. Could see a Rodriguez submission, later submission, via attritional damage, essentially. But I do expect these two to roll around for 15 minutes, strike it out. I think Rodriguez takes a close decision. I don't think he covers his money line price. I think this looks competitive, but I think Rodriguez gets the nod in Mexico City. So fight GTD, my favorite bet at minus 142 up to minus 150, but then also Rodriguez by decision and live after round one as well. I think Borges, his best round will likely be early. Billy, any thoughts on Lazy Boy against Kevin Borjas?
Yeah, I kind of like the go to decision angle just because Borjas, I think, is better than his 0-2 UFC record indicates. Like when you watch his fights, he seems better than that. But I didn't feel great about the plus 3.5. So maybe this is a way, to kind of bet on Borjas being undervalued, but not likely to actually win. So from that standpoint, I like it. I'm not sure if there's a better way to chase down that thesis, but I'm not really seeing one. So I like where you're going with that.
CJ Vergara versus Edgar Shirez. Flyweight fights typically go to a decision at about a 55% clip. This fight is minus 110 to go to a decision, and Shirez is plus 180 to win by decision. I like both of those bets. He's favored. He is the likelier finisher of the pair. I think more importantly, we need to watch Vergara on the scales. Vergara's missed weight 3 times, and when he misses weight, he's a guy who actually tries to make weight and ends up killing himself as a result, and then has no durability and no cardio on fight day. I don't think his cardio is bad when he has a good weight cut. I do think it's terrible when he has a bad weight cut. And sometimes guys miss weight and they actually have better gas tanks because they didn't actually try to make the weight. CJ, especially now that he's missed weight 3 times, if he misses again, he's cut. He will do everything in his power to make weight. As a result, if he doesn't make weight, I think he's going to be sapped on the scale. So this is dependent on CJ Vergara making weight, looking fine on the scales on Friday. But Shirez is younger. He's 5 years younger. He's more durable. He has the reach advantage. He has more power. I think he wins this fight pretty comfortably. I think he wins by decision more often than the betting market suggests. So Shirez Vergara goes to decision minus 110. May actually prefer the Shirez decision prop there at plus money because I'm pretty comfortable with him ultimately winning this fight. Billy, any thoughts on Vergara and Shirez, one of several flyweight fights we have in this card?
I mean, good on the UFC for not giving us heavyweights and light heavyweights at altitude this time because they
don't have heavyweights anymore. There's no heavyweights left on the roster.
Yeah.
They're slowly eliminating the division. People don't realize, but yeah. Thankfully, what was it, the Utah card that they put like Alex Pereira on, right? Wasn't Alex and Jan on the Utah card? They've put some big dudes at elevation, and they've been awful fights.
But on this fight specifically, you mentioned Vergara's weight misses, and there's been more of them. Chairez is 1-3 between the UFC and the Contender Series, and the only fight he won, he missed weight by 5 pounds. He came in at 131 for a flyweight fight.
Good note.
So, like, I don't want to bet this fight just because I don't have a lot of faith this fight is going to happen, given the weight missing between both guys. I like what you're saying. I think Chairez is better. There's just so much to parse out between both of them. Struggling on the scales, if one guy misses weight, not the other. If one guy misses weight by a little, one misses by a lot. Like, there's a lot of moving parts here that I don't feel super confident talking about before we have answers to.
Fair enough. Final fight I want to talk about from a prop perspective, Gabriel Miranda against Jamal Emmers. I lean to Emmers inside the distance here at -125. Consider the under 1.5 rounds at +120. But overall, I think this fight ends inside the distance more often than the odds suggest. I have it at about 70%, -235 implied. Miranda throws bombs. Like, he wings punches, but he is the grappling upside here. And Emmers is the type of fighter who is super skilled, like underrated based on all the actual skills he has. Great cardio, good athlete in general. But he does dumb shit inside the cage. Like, he will knock a guy down like Pat Sabatini and then follow him to the ground and get submitted. He, is typically a guy who will have a big wrestling advantage over an opponent and not pursue it. Or have a striking advantage over a guy like Pat Sabatini and try to grapple. So Emmers does not take the path of least resistance, basically ever. He's very likely to hurt Miranda and then like follow him to the ground and get his back taken and get submitted or do something incredibly stupid. So I do think both guys have finishing upside here. I think Emmers has more finishing upside because he's the better athlete. I think he can probably win this fight in rounds 2 or round 3 if he's patient. +420 round 2, 10-1 round 3, I think are interesting bets. But overall, fight to end inside the distance, Emmers inside the distance, under 1.5, all things I'm going to consider playing on what I view as not a binary fight because Emmers can grapple, but a fight where I think either Emmers wins via KO or Moreno wins via submission. So any thoughts on the under or any of the props on that fight, Billy? And then we'll get to some best bets.
Yeah, I like the knockout. He's this is going to be a weird comparison, but we talked about Brendan Allen coming into the Anthony Hernandez fight where we're like, the skills are all there, but he manages to not win fights that he should. And Jamal Emmers is that, but like way worse about it than Brendan Allen. He has also alternated wins and losses since getting in the UFC and is coming off a loss. So that is a good sign for Jamal Emmers. I think he can get a knockout in the 2nd or 3rd minute if he just doesn't do anything stupid and uses his reach advantage. It's almost like the Nacho Manuel Torres fight where Emmers has the reach advantage against a guy who's going to wing punches. So if you can just step back and land a straight shot, it should be there at all points. Don't have a lot of faith he actually does it. Emmers KO at +125 makes a lot of sense. Another guy I really like for like DFS tournaments because if he wins, it's probably going to be a pretty quick knockout or a knockout at some point. But he might just do something dumb and get submitted.
Seems very likely based upon his historical fight history, but Jamal Emmers technically a parlay value for me this week, along with Martinez. We'll see. I mean, they're both north of -400. I don't know if I'm going to end up putting those together. We've seen a number of big underdogs winning lately in the sport as well. Last year, such a favorite heavy year. I mean, sports in general have been so favorite heavy over the past year plus. UFC, we're starting to get a little bit more underdogs cashing of late, and I do think we've mentioned that the lines have been a little overinflated towards the dogs this year. Let's move to our best bets. Billy, you gave out Christian Rodriguez earlier in this week in your luck rankings at -140. He's currently as high as -170 now at DraftKings. So where's your cutoff price on C-Rod against Melky Costa? I'm interested in a live bet on C-Rod after round 1 in any fight that he's in, but especially in this fight against Melky Costa where I think he has a cardio advantage. And then any other props or totals you're considering on this fight as well.
Yeah, I kind of hate doing this because my best bet is a bet I made 4 days ago and you can't make right now. But, shameless plug, please go read those luck ratings. We're getting the CLV pretty consistently, even when the fights don't actually win. I think I'd probably be okay with like up to -180 or so on C-Rod. At this point, it's definitely a final bet and not a best bet versus the -140. not only does he have the cardio advantage kind of in general against everyone and his hit elevation, Melky Costa fought 3 weeks ago and stepped up to take this on short notice. My assumption or like guess on a lot of these situations is they didn't ask him on Sunday if he was going to fight 3 weeks later. He took a couple days off, probably put on some weight, had a good time, relaxed, enjoyed his win. And then they asked him, which is hard to come back from. It's hard to jump right back into training because you're usually a little bit beat up from the last camp. None of which would be a huge deal if we weren't at this massive elevation, which makes that even harder. And it's kind of a weirdly big step down in competition for C-Rod, who's just beaten undefeated prospect after undefeated prospect throughout his UFC run. Costa's fine. I think he's decent and like will stick around as a mid-level featherweight for a while in the UFC. But I don't think he's anywhere near as talented as Austin Bashi or Cameron Saman or Isaac Dalgarian or Raul Rosas, all of whom C-Rod took the undefeated records from. So Christian Rodriguez, considerably better overall fighter. I think very clear grappling advantage should he choose to use it, and then also the cardio. So don't love the price now, would still take it, probably about minus 180, I think would be where I draw the line for sure.
It's just an interesting fight for C-Rod. It's more like the Saman fight in that he's not going to have to resist the grappling, as much as he's had to against other opponents like Rosas, like Bulgarian. This is not. C-Rod is awesome at resisting, having better cardio, and then taking over against guys once they can't execute their A game plan. These two are going to be striking it out. C-Rod is super talented striking, has really flashy spinning attacks. Like, I would love to see him in more kickboxing matches. I would love to see him against guys who are a little bit more reckless so that he can actually show off like his technique and his dynamic approach. This could be an interesting, close and competitive striking fight, in my opinion, where if C-Rod doesn't proactively grapple, I do think the scores and, the fight could be a little bit closer than the money line suggests. C-Rod's been awesome as an underdog. Like I said, awesome at resisting and then taking over. I'm definitely interested live after round one. As you mentioned, the short notice ankle for Melky Costa. But that may be the best price that you get on C-Rod. Maybe not pre-fight. I would personally wait, especially now that it's moved closer to minus 165. I think round one is super competitive. C-Rod may lose it. Then I think he takes over in rounds 2 and rounds 3. But no bet on that fight for me. I'm going to go back to the featured bout between Kevin Gastelum and Joe Pyfer for my best bet. Goes to decision at minus 102. Welterweight fights go to decision at a 38% clip. Gastelum, though, middleweight fights go to decision at a 38% clip. Gastelum is really more of a welterweight fighting at middleweight. The welterweights get to a decision closer to 45% of the time. There's a big gap between the 170 and 185 pound divisions. Then once you get to 205, it increases even more. Heavyweights don't actually finish each other as much as the light heavyweights because they slow down a lot more quickly. It's just like an interesting dynamic thing. You go down the scale too. The flyweights actually have higher finishing rates than the 135ers and 145ers. I don't know if there's a thing where like once you get to a certain lower weight that your durability like lessens, or if these guys are just a little bit faster. I do think the sliding scale though of UFC finish rates is really interesting because near the edges of like the weight divisions, they actually like go the opposite direction again. But just going back to the
sample size thing there, though. With
there
flyweights.
Is, yes.
Like there's not
fewer
as many
flyweights.
So if you get one guy who can get a lot of finishes at flyweights, it skews the sample a lot more than like there's 17 bantamweight fights every weekend. It feels like where flyweights are a little bit harder to find.
And the bantamweight is also just a deeper division in general. Bantamweights have the lowest finish rate in the UFC, and over the past 3 years, bantamweights aren't finishing each other at all. It's like a 38% finish rate at bantamweight. It's ridiculous how talented that division is. And I really think it's more of like a talent issue than it is like a relative weight scale issue. I think if you went to other regional promotions, it would balance out a little bit better. And then heavyweights too, we'll get to my best bet in a minute, but heavyweights, they're often fighting main events, right? They're sticking these guys in main events where they have to like conserve the cardio, and you would think there would be increased finishing chances in main events, but actually I think they slow down and like don't finish each other as a result. So yeah, the samples get skewed. There's fewer heavyweights, there's fewer flyweights, and then I think more of those heavyweight fights end up being main events. But just to go back to your points about Gastelum and like his extreme durability, as I said, welterweight fights, middleweight fights end inside the distance like 65 to 70% of the time. Gastelum's gone to decision at about a 70% clip in the UFC. Never KO'd, as you said. I don't even know if he's been knocked down at any point.
He got knocked down like 4 times by Izzy, but recovered.
That's right,
time.
that Izzy fight. Yep.
So like, the Izzy, we've both said he has great durability. It's almost probably more accurate to say he has like elite recoverability because he gets rocked and you think he's done what seems like every fight, and then he's fine 4 seconds later. So like that might actually be a better way to put it, but same concept either way.
Absolutely, yeah. And I mean, because he's fighting essentially at a higher weight class than he should, he has a great gas tank. He can maintain his cardio for 15 minutes. Doesn't look like he would. Doesn't look like he's in the best shape, but he has a great gas tank. Can wrestle a little bit too, and I think the wrestling is enough to counteract any grappling that Piper may try to implement here, because that's where I think the fight finishes most consistently is Piper via submission. Gastelum has been submitted 3 times. I think Piper, if he gets on top, has a grappling advantage, and he's also the much bigger man, 5 inches taller, 4-inch reach advantage. As we said, the much more natural middleweight. He's actually cutting to make middleweight, whereas Gastelum probably isn't cutting to stay at middleweight. The problem for Piper is the gas tank. Now, we've seen him go 5 rounds. The gas tank doesn't appear to be as big of a problem as it used to be now that he's been able to stretch out to 5 rounds, dial back to 3. I think he can handle 3 rounds okay. If this were a 5-round fight, I would be considering Kelvin Gastelum here at this price. I would definitely consider Gastelum either way live after round 1, because that's likely where the best price point comes if Gastelum is going to turn the tables. Piper's very dangerous early. I do think the momentum may flip, though, in the 2nd or 3rd rounds. But as I talked about earlier, at elevation, Piper may just freak out and start the fight with a different tempo than he normally does. He may be a little bit more conservative early and then try to manage his gas tank a little bit better for the 2nd and 3rd rounds. If that happens, it just makes me like the over more in this fight. But regardless, Gastelum's durability, Piper probably finishing via submission the likeliest way. I think this one ends inside the distance. Beyond that, maybe Gastelum via attritional finish in the 3rd round. But I do think this fight goes to a decision closer to -130 is where I projected it. Getting it at -102, fine with that. Up to about -120. Billy, I know you gave out Gastelum. I know we talked about a lot of the fights on this card. Anything else you want to mention before we jump off for the weekend?
Yeah, just quick final thought on Joe Pyfer. He went 5 rounds against Jack Hermanson, but he lost the final 3 unanimously. So, to say he has 5 rounds of cardio is a little bit of a misnomer. Theoretically, he was there, but especially that 5th round, he was doing nothing. I think he landed 4 significant strikes in the 5th round of that fight. So, desperately shooting takedowns, and then when they didn't work, just kind of laying there. So, yes, in theory, he can go 5 rounds. And I almost feel like 3 rounds in Mexico City is the equivalent of 5 at the Apex from a cardio standpoint, especially for bigger guys. So I agree with everything you say. I think it correlates very nicely with Gastelum winning, and I like +250 a little bit better than the -102. And then Gastelum decision, if you want to go that, or Gastelum late, kind of combines both of our thoughts and gets an even better price.
Yeah, we were on Hermanson in that fight. We were both on him at about the same price as this Gastelum fight. Like I said, if this was 5 rounds, I think Gastelum could basically do what Hermanson did, rally over the final 3. Mm-hmm. In a 3-round fight, I think Joe Pyfer may have enough, but we will see. I think Gastelum either way makes it competitive. I think he survives all 15 minutes, and that'll do it for our UFC betting preview. You can find more UFC betting content from both Billy and myself, both on actionnetwork.com and in the Action Network app. And if you'd like to instantly tell some of the bets we discussed on today's show, make sure to look for the quick slip links in both the podcast and video descriptions, or visit actionnetwork.com/betnow. Don't forget to download the free award-winning Action Network app and sign up for Action Pro for immediate access to expert picks and analysis. Best of luck with all your bets this weekend. Enjoy the violence. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.